She was still smiling when I walked out of the courthouse. That image, her standing on the front steps, arms crossed, that satisfied look on her face, stayed with me the whole drive home. She thought she'd won. For about 45 minutes she actually had. Then, my attorney called. I'm going to back up. Because none of this makes sense without the full picture. And I've been sitting on this story for almost 2 years now, trying to decide whether to tell it. My daughter finally talked me into it. She said, "Dad, you spent 31 years being quiet. You've earned the right to speak." She's not wrong. My name isn't important. What matters is that I'm 58 years old. I spent 3 decades building a life I was proud of, and somewhere in the middle of all that building, the woman I built it with decided she'd rather be somewhere else, with someone else. And she wanted to take everything with her when she left. I met my wife in the fall of 1993. We were both at a mutual friend's backyard cookout in Columbus, Ohio. She was laughing at something someone said, and I remember thinking that was the best sound I'd ever heard. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony at her parents' church, and moved into a starter house on the east side of town. I was 32. I thought I had everything figured out. The first decade was good. Genuinely good. We had our daughter in 1996, and our son 2 years later. I was working in commercial real estate development, site assessment, project coordination, the kind of work that sounds boring until you realize you're helping decide where a hospital gets built or where a neighborhood grocery store goes up. It mattered to me. It also meant I traveled. Not constantly, but regularly. 2 weeks here, a long weekend there. I'd fly out to Phoenix or Atlanta or Indianapolis, spend time with contractors and city planners, then come home and try to be as present as possible. My wife worked in hospital administration. She was good at it, organized and sharp, the kind of person who remembered everyone's name and made things run smoothly. For a long time, that felt like balance. 2 people with careers, 2 kids, a house that needed constant attention, and enough love between us, or what I thought was love, to hold it all together. I noticed the distance starting around 2009. I couldn't have named it then. Looking back, it's obvious. She stopped asking about my trips, stopped mentioning her days at work. We'd have dinner together and talk about the kids' school schedules, what needed fixing in the house, what her mother needed that week, everything except each other. I told myself that was just what long marriages looked like. I'd seen it in other couples. I thought we were fine. We weren't fine. In the spring of 2016, I came home 3 days early from a project in Denver. The coordination with the contractor had fallen apart, and there was nothing left for me to do on-site, so I rebooked my flight and landed at John Glenn Airport on a Tuesday afternoon instead of a Friday. I didn't call ahead. I figured I'd surprise her, maybe take her out to dinner. The surprise was mine. I'm not going to describe what I found in detail. I'll just say that the man in my house was not a repairman, not a relative, and not someone I had ever been introduced to. My wife was not expecting me. She handled it about as badly as a person can handle something like that. I left the house. I drove around Columbus for about 2 hours. I ended up at a Frisch's Big Boy on the east side, sitting in a booth, drinking terrible coffee, trying to figure out what the previous 23 years of my life had actually been. When I came home that night, she was composed. She'd clearly had time to prepare. She told me the relationship had been going on for about 8 months. She said she'd been unhappy for a long time. She said I was never really there, not emotionally, not consistently, and that she deserved more. She didn't apologize. What she said, almost word for word, was, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I'm not sorry for wanting to be happy." I asked her if she wanted a divorce. She said she needed to think about it. She thought about it for 4 years. That part surprises people, but I understand it now in a way I didn't then. She wasn't thinking about whether she wanted out. She was thinking about what she wanted to take with her. Our daughter was finishing college. Our son was 2 years behind her. The house had appreciated significantly. We bought smart and renovated carefully, and we were sitting on a lot of equity. My pension through the state employees' retirement system, which I joined through a consulting arrangement in 2011, was approaching a substantial balance. She was calculating. I'm not saying she was evil. I'm saying she was methodical. In January of 2020, she came to me and said she wanted the divorce. She said she'd already consulted an attorney. She had a list of terms: the house, half my retirement accounts, spousal support of $3,500 a month for 7 years. She called it rehabilitative alimony, which her lawyer had apparently coached her to request, and primary custody of our son, who was 21 at the time and still finishing his degree and living at home part-time. Our daughter was 23. She'd been out of the house for 2 years. I want to pause here and explain something, because when I've told pieces of this story to people, this is the part that confuses them. Primary custody of a 21-year-old. I know how that sounds. What our attorney was actually arguing was that because our son still lived at home periodically and was still financially dependent, the question of the family home's occupancy was relevant to his stability. It was a legal maneuver, not a genuine custody claim in the traditional sense. Her attorney framed it as ensuring our son had a primary residence designated in the decree. It was about controlling who kept the house. Not about our son himself, who was a grown man fully capable of deciding where he slept. Our son, when he found out, was furious with her, not with me. He called me from his apartment near Ohio State and said, "Dad, I just want you to know I'm not part of this." I told him I knew that. I told him I loved him. I told him not to let any of it change his relationship with his mother, because whatever had happened between us had nothing to do with how much she loved him. I believed that then. I still believe it. My daughter, on the other hand, had known about the affair for over a year before I did. My wife had told her in what I can only assume was a moment of misguided honesty. My daughter had kept it from me because she didn't know what to do with it, and carrying that secret had cost her something. She was angry, not just at her mother, but at the situation, at the impossible position she'd been put in. The day my wife filed, my daughter drove 3 hours from her apartment in Cincinnati and sat with me at my kitchen table for most of an evening. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She just didn't want me to be alone with it. I hired an attorney the week after my wife served me. His name was Harold Fitch, a family law specialist out of a firm in downtown Columbus, with a reputation for being thorough and very difficult to rattle. He came recommended by a colleague who'd been through a rough divorce a few years earlier. When I walked into Harold's office and laid out everything, the affair, the financial requests, the custody framing, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Tell me about the prenuptial agreement." I looked at him. "We didn't have one." He nodded slowly. "Okay, what about your mortgage? Is it in both names?" "Yes." "Retirement accounts. When did you open them, and were any open before the marriage?" I had opened a small IRA in 1991, 2 years before the wedding. That account and its growth was technically separate property. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something. "She's going to ask for the house," Harold said, "and she may get it depending on how the judge reads the equity. But alimony in Ohio, courts don't always award it in cases of documented marital fault. Has she admitted to the affair in writing anywhere?" "Text messages? Emails?" I thought about it. There were text messages from 2016. I have screenshots. Harold looked at me differently then. "Keep those." What happened over the next 14 months was slow and often exhausting. My wife's attorney was aggressive. They filed motions, requested documents, pushed for depositions. My wife sat across from me in a conference room one afternoon and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as impatience, like I was taking too long to accept the inevitable. Her attorney had told her, I think, that the financial settlement was largely in her favor. The house value alone, split, would have been a significant sum. The alimony request was steep, but not unusual for a marriage of our length in Ohio courts. She had reason to feel confident. There were 2 things she didn't know about. The first was the prenuptial agreement her own parents had insisted we sign. Not the standard kind, not a full asset division document, but a fault clause. Her father, God rest him, had been a cautious man, and when we'd gotten engaged, he'd sat me down privately and told me he loved his daughter, but he wasn't blind to her stubbornness. He'd asked, almost apologetically, whether we'd be willing to include a clause that addressed marital misconduct. I'd agreed without hesitation, thinking it was just a formality, thinking I'd never need it. My wife had signed it. I had signed it. It had been witnessed and notarized and filed, and then it had sat in a manila envelope in a fireproof safe in my home office for 27 years. I had completely forgotten about it. Harold had not forgotten about it because I'd mentioned it offhandedly in our 3rd meeting when I was trying to remember every document we'd ever signed. He'd gone very still and asked me to bring it to him as soon as possible. When I did, he read it carefully, set it down on his desk and said, "She signed this." "Yes, and she's the one who committed documented marital infidelity." "Yes." He looked at me. This changes things. The second thing she didn't know about was that Harold had been quietly, methodically building a paper trail for the past several months. Not to prove the affair, we had the text messages for that, but to document the financial pattern. She'd opened the joint credit card in 2017, approximately a year after the affair began, and had been using it for expenses I'd never questioned. Dinners I'd assumed were work events. Weekends I'd been told were visits to her sister in Pittsburgh. Harold's forensic accountant had gone through 4 years of statements. Some of those charges had been made on dates when her sister had been in Florida. Some had been made at hotels in Cleveland and Nashville. It wasn't about the money. The amounts weren't staggering. It was about documentation. It was about making the record complete. The morning of the final hearing, I drove to the courthouse alone. I hadn't slept well. I sat in the parking garage for about 10 minutes, just breathing. Harold had told me to let him handle the talking, to stay calm, and to trust the process. He'd also said, the evening before, I want you to be prepared for her reaction when we introduce the clause. It may be significant. I understood what he meant. She arrived at the courthouse with her attorney in what appeared to be a great deal of confidence. She was wearing a dark blazer I'd bought her for her 50th birthday. She glanced at me in the hallway and gave me a look that I recognized. The same one from the conference room. The same impatience. She was ready for this to be over. She had the next chapter of her life already planned. The hearing was not long. Her attorney presented their terms. Harold presented ours. When he introduced the fault clause from the 1993 agreement, her attorney asked for a recess. My wife leaned over and spoke to her lawyer in a low, urgent voice. I kept my eyes forward. The judge reviewed the document. He confirmed it had been properly executed and witnessed. He noted that Ohio courts, while they do not automatically deny alimony in cases of marital fault, give significant weight to documented misconduct, particularly when a prenuptial clause specifically addresses it. Her request for $3,500 a month was not granted. A much smaller figure for a much shorter period was considered. The house, given that both children were adults and neither was legally dependent, was ordered sold, with equity divided rather than awarded to either party outright. She would not be keeping the house. She would not be receiving the alimony she planned her next 7 years around. I didn't react in the courtroom. I'd learned from Harold that you don't react in the courtroom. You sit still and you let the process do what it does. She was on the front steps when I came out. Her attorney had left. She was standing there alone, and she still had that look, diminished now, but still there, like she was waiting for someone to tell her this was a mistake. I nodded at her and kept walking toward the parking garage. Harold was beside me. He leaned over and said quietly, "It's final, Daniel. It's done." That was it. 5 words. Not a dramatic whisper with strings playing behind it. Just a tired man in a good suit telling me that 31 years had just been formally concluded in a building that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. I sat in my car for a long time. My daughter called me that afternoon. I told her it was over and that the outcome was fair. She asked if I was okay. I said I wasn't sure yet. She said, "That's honest." Then she said, "I'm coming up this weekend. We're going to eat something terrible and watch bad television, and you're going to be fine." She was right. Not immediately, but eventually. My son called that evening. He said he'd heard from his mother that things hadn't gone the way she expected. He wasn't happy about it. Not in a victorious way. He just wanted to make sure I was all right. He said, "I don't know everything that happened, Dad, but I know you're a good man." I didn't say much. I didn't trust my voice. The house sold 8 months later. The market was strong, and we got close to asking price. After the mortgage payoff and the split, my share was enough to buy a modest place outright in a neighborhood I'd always liked, a quiet street in Bexley, older homes, mature trees, the kind of place where neighbors actually wave at each other. I put a small vegetable garden in the backyard the first spring. Tomatoes, zucchini, herbs, it needed attention. I liked that. I'm not going to pretend it was a clean ending. It wasn't. There are still holiday dinners where my daughter and my son have to figure out logistics, still moments where I can see the cost of all of it on their faces. My son has worked hard to maintain a relationship with his mother, and I've told him consistently that I think that's right, that whatever happened between the adults in his family should never ask him to choose. He's a good young man. Both of them are. I was talking to my daughter a few months ago. We were sitting on the back porch of my house in Bexley, and she said something I've thought about a lot since. She said, "The thing I couldn't understand for a long time was why you agreed to everything in that hearing. You said, 'Give her what she wants.' I thought you were giving up." I told her I wasn't giving up. I was waiting for the document to speak for itself. When you've been patient for 4 years, a few more hours in a courthouse isn't hard. She thought about that. Then she said, "That's a very dad thing to do." Maybe it is. I'm 58 years old. I have a garden that needs work every summer, 2 kids who call me regularly, and a house that's finally fully mine. Some mornings I wake up early and sit on the porch with coffee before the neighborhood gets loud, and I think about all the years I spent trying to keep something together that was already coming apart. I don't regret those years. I regret that it ended the way it did. There's a difference. My daughter told me recently that she's glad I finally told this story. She said she thinks there are a lot of people out there, men in particular, who've been through something like this and felt like they couldn't say so. Like they were supposed to just absorb it and move on and not take up any space with their own hurt. I don't know if this helps anyone. I just know that for a long time I was the quietest person in every room about this, and I don't think that silence did me any good. She was still smiling when I walked out of that courthouse. I meant it when I said that. She just stopped smiling before I got to my car. There's a version of this story where I become someone I wouldn't recognize, where I walk out of that courthouse bitter and loud, where I spend the next decade replaying every grievance, where I let what happened to me become the whole definition of who I am. I've seen that version in other men. I understand how it happens. Betrayal at that scale. 31 years, a family, a life built brick by brick. It has weight to it. It can crush you if you let it sit wrong. I didn't let it sit wrong. Not because I'm particularly noble, because I didn't have a choice about what had already happened, only about what I did next. The thing I keep coming back to is the prenuptial clause. Her father asked me to sign that document in 1993 because he was a man who thought carefully before he acted. He wasn't pessimistic about our marriage. He was honest about human nature. He understood that good intentions aren't the same as good character, and that character reveals itself over time, under pressure, when no one is watching. He built a safeguard not out of distrust, but out of clear-eyed understanding of how the world actually works. I've thought about him a lot since the hearing. He passed before any of this happened. I think he'd have been quietly unsurprised. What I've learned, and I mean actually learned, the kind that costs something, is that doing the right thing over a long period of time is its own form of preparation. I didn't stay faithful to my marriage because I was calculating some future advantage. I stayed faithful because that's who I am. I didn't keep those text messages from 2016 because I suspected I'd need them someday. I kept them because I'm the kind of person who keeps records. I didn't hire Harold Fitch because I was planning a counterattack. I hired him because when something important needs doing, you find the most capable person available and you trust the process. None of that is strategy. All of it is character. And character over time compounds. My daughter asked me once whether I was angry. I told her the honest answer, which is that I was angry for a while, then I got tired of it. Anger is expensive. It runs on something, and when that something runs out, you're left hollow. What replaced it, slowly, was something steadier. A kind of clarity. I knew who I was. I knew what I'd done right and what I'd done wrong. I knew that I'd been a good father even when I was an imperfect husband, and that my children knew it, and that their knowing it mattered more to me than any settlement figure. The garden I planted that first spring in Bexley. I almost didn't do it. I thought it was too small a thing for how large everything felt. I did it anyway. Tomatoes, zucchini, a few herbs along the fence. It needed daily attention. It didn't care about what had happened in a Columbus courthouse. It just needed water and time and someone who showed up. That's most of what I know about getting through hard things. You show up. You stay honest. You think before you act, and you act when it matters. You don't confuse patience with passivity. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait until the document speaks for itself. She stopped smiling before I got to my car. I've had a lot of mornings since then that felt like that drive home from the courthouse. Quiet, a little uncertain, but moving in the right direction. That's enough.